Sorry for the change of scenery. I am currently still traveling for work, but I wanted to take a moment here to look at some exceptional note-taking fountain pens made by Pilot. The pen that we have in front of us is the modern Pilot Vanishing Point, which is also known as the Capless, and it has a direct lineage to the original Capless that was released in 1963. However, that 1963 version featured a rotating back mechanism that if you rotated that dial would extend and retract a nib. And that mechanism was quickly phased out in 1964 with a knocking mechanism similar to what we see today. However, in 2006, Pilot decided to re-release that rotating mechanism with a new model, the Pilot Fermo. And what I'd like to do today is take a closer look at this pen, as well as do direct comparisons with the modern Vanishing Point. The bottom finial has a metal cap with a dome shape in the middle, and then the rotating dial is pretty cylindrical in shape, which features a bunch of ribs in an array that give you very good grip. We then have a chrome ring followed by a step up to the barrel, and the barrel is straight to another chrome ring. The top barrel then has another chrome ring, and at the bottom it does feature some text which reads Pilot Fermo, Japan. There's an ever so slight taper down to a nose cone, and it does feature a clip that has a lot of similarities to the Vanishing Point. There's a pinch section at the top to help guide your fingers, and an arched profile with a flare-up at the bottom. The nose cone features a D cutout, and if I rotate the back dial, there's a flap that will move down and the nib will come out. If I give the back dial a rotation in the other direction, the nib will retract back into the pen and the flap will move back up. This rotating mechanism is spring-loaded, so in order to lock the nib in place, you have to overcome that spring. But then, in order to retract the nib, it's just a simple flick. In the hand, the pen is fairly heavy and very well balanced. The center of gravity is just inside the crook of my hand. It is a fairly long pen. It reminds me quite a bit of a lot of pens when they have posted caps. And the ergonomics are okay. They're not great for me for long writing sessions, but they're perfectly comfortable for short notes. Before we do the direct comparison between the Vanishing Point and the Pilot Fermo, I wanted to take a moment here to compare it with a few other fountain pens. Up top, we have the Pilot E95S, which is an extremely popular pocket-sized fountain pen made by Pilot. Down below, we have the TWSBI Vac Mini, which is a compact fountain pen that holds a significant amount of ink. And down below, we have the Kaweco Sport in brass, which is another extremely popular pocket-sized fountain pen. We can see in their cap form, the Fermo is significantly longer than the rest. The TWSBI Vac Mini is the second longest, followed by the E95S, and the Kaweco Sport is the shortest of the bunch. The Fermo and the TWSBI both feature bent metal clips. The Kaweco Sport is offered with a removable clip, but I don't currently have it. And the Pilot E95S has a spring-loaded clip. Let's take a look at these pens with their caps removed. Uncapped, again, the Pilot Fermo is by far the longest pen, followed by the TWSBI Vac Mini, and then the Pilot E95S, and then the Kaweco Sport is the shortest of the bunch. The Kaweco and the TWSBI both feature stainless steel nibs. The E95S is offered in a 14 karat gold nib, which is inlaid, and the Fermo has an 18 karat gold nib, which is semi-hooded inside the retractable fountain pen. Let's take a look at these pens with their caps posted. We can see in their posted form, all of the pens are now suddenly very comparable in length, with the exception of the Kaweco Sport, which is significantly shorter than the rest. Directly comparing the Vanishing Point with the Fermo, we can see when the nibs are retracted that both pens are virtually identical in overall length. The Vanishing Point has a nose cone that's a lot longer than the Fermo, and while the clips look identical in this view, On their profile, they actually have a fairly significant difference. The Vanishing Point has a much larger arch with a nub at the bottom to act as a clasping mechanism, whereas the Fermo has a much more subtle arch with a flare-up at the bottom, and that flare-up makes it very easy to go over fabrics and thin notebooks. As we work our way down on the top barrel, we see the marking. The Fermo has the marking contained all on one line, whereas the Vanishing Point has the marking split between two. The division between the two barrels is styled virtually identically between the two pens. And then the lower barrel on the Vanishing Point is longer than the Fermo, as is the bottom ring of that barrel. We then have the mechanisms to extend and retract the nib. On the Fermo, it has this dial, which is virtually silent, but also does require two hands to operate. And on the Vanishing Point, you can operate it with one hand, but it is fairly loud. And with the nibs extended, we do see another major difference between these two pens. The Vanishing Point is significantly shorter with the nib extended. I also want to mention at this point that both pens have identical nib units that are fully swappable. In the hand, the Fermo is longer and has a balance that's closer to the crook of your hand. I find, as I mentioned, it's very similar to writing with a pen with its cap posted, and the ergonomics of the actual grip are very similar to that of the Vanishing Point. The Vanishing Point, on the other hand, is a much shorter pen when the nib is extended, and the center of gravity is closer to the front of the pen. So personally, I find this one a little bit more comfortable for short notes. To disassemble the Pilot Fermo, there isn't much that you can do. The barrels unscrew from each other, and the back barrel contains that knocking mechanism, which is really difficult to remove, but you can see it go up and down as I rotate the dial. So that's kind of cool. And then you can also remove the nib unit from the front of the barrel. And the front barrel does contain a spring inside it, as well as the flap to seal off the nib, but those are both very difficult to remove, so I don't recommend messing with them. And then we have the nib unit itself. And as I mentioned, this is identical to the nib unit used on the Pilot Vanishing Point. It features an 18-karat gold nib, and this one is marked with an M for medium. It's a long, skinny nib with a very fragile plastic feed on the back. I don't recommend disassembling this nib from the feed. And also it's important to note, because the nib is so long with an inlet for ink right there, you have to dip this pen pretty deeply into ink in order to fill it up. We then have a metal body with a step up and a stud at the top to help with reassembly, which we'll take a look at in a moment. And then we have a cartridge. I was kind of surprised that the Con 40 converter wasn't included with this pen, but I'm okay with just having blank cartridges because I'm not a big fan of the Con 40 converter. In this cartridge, I've eyedropper filled it with Monteverde Midnight Black, and the pen is currently ready to be written with. To reassemble the pen, we are going to put the nib unit into the front barrel. The front barrel has a cutout in the threads, which lines up with that stud. And then we can screw our back barrel onto that. And now we're ready to write. Okay, writing with the Pilot Fermo. Rotate the back dial to extend the nib. And today we have an 18-karat gold medium nib. And it is an exceptional nib, especially considering its size. It's extremely smooth, wet, and it has a little bit of bounce. So it really feels like a premium fountain pen writing experience. Our ink again is Monteverde. Midnight Black. For flex, I'm going to turn the page. As I mentioned, this nib does have a bit of bounce to it, and you can see that with some line variation. And for reverse writing, it's a little bit awkward to hold with that clip, but I'm going to try. It's actually fairly smooth, but it is scratchier than the front ways up. You get a much thinner line, and really that feed kept up tremendously. So I would say if you are in a pinch, in a meeting or out and about, and you need a thinner line, you certainly could reverse write with this pen. So what do I think of the Pilot Fermo? I've grown to really love this pen. I not only like the smooth operation of the mechanism to extend and retract the nib, but it almost feels like a fidget spinner. And to me, it is an improvement over the Lamy Dialogue 3, which I fairly recently reviewed. That one, it felt kind of ambiguous if you had fully closed the pen. And this one, with this spring-loaded mechanism, I never second guess it. Also, the nib, as I mentioned, it's an absolute joy to write with. I'm a big fan of Pilot Gold nibs, and this one doesn't disappoint. Also, that mechanism to open and close this pen, not only is it smooth, but it's silent. And to me, it does feel like an upgrade over the Pilot Vanishing Point. The Vanishing Point is a great, reliable writer and a workhorse of a pen, but it is a little bit clunky and fairly loud in meetings. Not overly so, but noticeable, especially compared to the Fermo. Also, I feel like there is a chance of accidentally opening up this pen if you were to put it in a pouch or a pocket, just by clicking on the back button. And that fear is completely removed with this nice rotating dial. I also think that this pen has a nice amount of heft, and it is a bit heavier than the Vanishing Point, which again makes it feel like a little bit more of a premium pen. And then one other point for an improvement over the Vanishing Point is the clip. It does have a very similar style, so it gives you a nice anchor for your fingers, but it also has a slightly more low profile with a nice flare up at the bottom, and that flare up does make this clip a little bit more practical to use. Now, is this the perfect note taker? No, I think that there is certainly room for improvement, and I do have a few nitpicks. One that I mentioned is I do think that this pen is a bit long. It's a well-balanced pen, but the length of the pen reminds me more of a typical pen with the cap posted, and I don't personally post my caps very often. So I think if you do have large hands and you do prefer posting your caps, this pen might be more comfortable for you. Another potential drawback for this pen is just the limited offerings of different colors. The Vanishing Point is offered in a huge variety of colors, and this one is only offered in a handful. And another thing to consider is, again, this clip. Just like with the Pilot Vanishing Point, this clip placement and the fact that it is part of your grip is a point of contention for many people, and it can be polarizing. So I recommend, if you are considering this pen, to maybe try it out before you buy it. And then lastly, probably my biggest gripe with this pen, and again, it's something that I share with the Vanishing Point, is this nib unit. I don't have anything specifically wrong with the nib itself. As I mentioned, it's a great performing nib. However, I don't like how long it is and how difficult it is to fit inside a bottle to get ink. That's a really long nib. That, plus if you do have the Con 40 converter, not only does it not hold much ink, but you can't really see your ink level very well. Most of the part that's visible is taken up with the piston. But with all that being said, I do think that this is a fantastic note taker, a very premium pen to own, and one that is suitable to bring into office settings without drawing much attention to yourself. And in the vast majority of ways, a bit of an upgrade over the Pilot Vanishing Point. So that just leaves me to say, thank you for watching.